Welcome back to Face the Ace. I am Ace, and we're doing something a little different today. Welcome to my bar, and I think I'm going to call this series Bad Movie Brew, where, yes, we could sit here and talk about a bad movie, but wouldn't it be a little bit better if we can add some alcohol to it? So today we are discussing two movies. I decided to do a double feature before I enter the Bad Movie Brew, and it was See No Evil, both 1 and 2. So, you're probably wondering, what is See No Evil? But if you're a pro wrestling fan like myself, you might already know. See No Evil stars Kane, a professional wrestler where his character himself is almost like a slasher villain. A mix of Michael Myers, but then having the tragic backstory of Jason burning in a morgue that was set on fire by his brother, the Undertaker, who is a undead zombie type. It's hard to explain. They're really cool, though. Trust me, they're really cool. And during Kane's run here in WWE, they had a actually very impressive marketing tactic where Kane would freak out over the date May 19th. Now, May 19th might just be a normal day for some of you, but in the WWE Kane Undertaker lore, that I guess was the day Kane's mother died in the fire, because Kane doesn't really care about his father, who was revealed to be Paul Bear, who was the Paul Bear in the morgue and was Undertaker's manager in wrestling, but then turned out to be Kane's father. So Kane and Undertaker's mother had an affair. I'm telling you, they're cool. Trust me, they're cool. Oh god, this beer made a mess like this movie. Okay, so we get to this movie, right? So it is your typical slasher villain type of thing. In 2006, in an era where Saw 1 and 2 were just released, and you kind of had the Rob Zombie Halloween movies making their way around the corner, the movie is definitely edited in that style. I can't explain it other than Saw. It just looks like a bad version of Saw. And man, bless their hearts, they tried, but they only had believe an $8 million budget. Other than Kane, if you count him, there's really no notable big names that could get somebody to the theater. And it did ultimately underperform. Now, the film is about a group of criminals. This is the first time they're doing a co-ed community service at an abandoned hotel. I'm not too sure what the actual job they have to do at the hotel, but sure. And so you meet your band of characters, and of course these will become the victims of See No Evil. I guess that would technically be his name, right? And so we find out later on that his name is Jacob Goodnight. So they're in this abandoned hotel, and ultimately they get there's some fun kills that have to do with an elevator. Throughout the movie, there's a couple of cool practical shots. There's one with a hand that literally falls off, and the hand is still moving. That's fun and everything. But ultimately, the movie kind of just loses you for a little bit. I got a little bored, and towards the end, and then it had the reveal. So the whole lore of Jacob Goodnight is that his mother believes that he was brought down by God to take sins out of people by physically taking their eyes out. So it's very Friday the 13th, Norman Bates Psycho. There is a connection to the mother, mommy issues, which is a recurring thing with a lot of slasher villains in this genre. I didn't have a problem with that per se. It just felt very lazy. I like the premise that he actually has a reason that he was taking out the eyes and collecting them. He was taking out their sins so they could see no evil. I get it. It's very on the nose, but it's a fun concept. I didn't necessarily have a problem with it per se. But ultimately, it kind of lacks in a lot of areas. I think it has a charm to it now, watching it in 2025. it just screams 2006. I mean, everyone's pants is so baggy in this movie, and the cell phones and stuff like that. It does have a certain charm to it, like watching an old 80s slasher. You kind of could get some fun out of it, especially if you're very nostalgic for that time, like I do, because it was around the time I did start watching professional wrestling, and it is unfortunately one of the medias that I love and I hold very dear to my heart. And this movie does bring back a simpler time in pro wrestling. As a kid, of course, you see trailers for this stuff, you think like, oh, this is as big as like, you know, a Star Wars movie or a superhero movie, because you just think every movie like, you know, does well as a kid because it's in a movie theater. But no, it didn't really perform that well. It probably broke even looking up the box office, but nothing spectacular. Nothing you would think would warrant a sequel. Yes, they actually made a sequel to this thing in 2014. And in this movie, Jacob Goodnight is rocking a mask. So, once again, leaning towards the more slasher villain type. And in WWE at this time, the character Kane started with a mask in the 90s, and then in the 2000s didn't have a mask, much like the Jacob Goodnight character in See No Evil 1. But in 2014, they did run it back and have the mask back on. So in this movie, he had a mask on. You could see through the face, though. So at the end of the first movie, Jacob Goodnight gets stabbed in the eye, and he gets sent down pretty much at the top of the hotel. He goes down in a really bad CGI fiasco, goes through glass. His eye is just really messed up. So he wears the mask because of that. But at the end of the first one, they think they're dead. This movie takes place right after the first one. Like, probably like an hour after the first movie ended. And once again, this is 2014. Kane is 8 years older. So, luckily, Glenn Jacobs himself, like, in theory, looks the same, but you can tell he's aged up, like, a bit. So, they end up in this morgue, and it is just full of a group of some of the most unlikable people ever. Like, I thought the last movie was filled with unlikable people, but it's even worse in this movie, and I just was not feeling it in this first, like, half hour. I thought it was moving really slow. I guess it was the girl's birthday, which the main girl, Danielle Harris, a horror legend in the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, kind of cool that she joined this franchise as well. And so they're throwing this party in the morgue because it's this girl's birthday who works in the morgue. There's this guy that works with her that's kind of, you know, the nerdy twink type boy in love with her, but then he kind of just like falls to the waist, goes somewhere else while the party's going on. I think he just goes back to his job actually while the party's going on. What a loser. As I can't imagine like drinking this stuff in a morgue. Like, maybe that's the germaphobe in me talking, but imagine the bacteria from, you know, dead bodies, and just, you get the shivers thinking about it. So much so, there's one scene where two characters are getting it on, let's say, and the one girl, for some reason, jumps on Jacob Goodnight, who is presumed to be dead at this point, and she kissed him. She kissed the body and then went back to kissing the dude. And the guy was just into that? But that's when the shenanigans start. As I compared the first movie to Saw a lot because of its editing style and how a lot of the kills were. It was very brutal. This, you could tell, was made in 2014. The kind of the Conjuring era of horror movies, right? They literally did the match scene like in The Conjuring where the lights go out. They did it twice. They did it one with a match just like The Conjuring, and then they did it later with a lighter, which, you know. So, you know, Jacob Goodnight's doing his thing. A lot of kills in this movie. I think I like this movie more. I gave the first movie a 1.5 stars. I think I'd give this one 2 stars. You know, if I'm with a group of friends, we're drinking, we want to watch a stupid horror movie, and I had to choose between See No Evil or its sequel, I think I'm choosing the sequel because this is a strong second half. That first half, you know, you're a little buzzed anyway, so maybe, you know, the mingling with your friends could get you through that first half, but that second half is strong. There's some really exciting parts. It ultimately ends with everyone dying, and Jacob Goodnight, I think the theory was going to use the morgue as kind of his lair, similar to what we saw in the new Halloween movies, where Michael Myers used the kind of the tunnel sewers as his lair. But ultimately, there was no See No Evil 3 yet. Currently, Kane, the man who played Mr. Goodnight, is the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee. So my theory is, Kane, when you're done with all that, pull a Schwarzenegger. You gotta make your comeback. See No Evil 3's gotta happen. The Sci-Fi Channel needs you. And that's ultimately what these movies feel like. They feel like Sci-Fi Channel movies. I think I literally watched the first one on the Sci-Fi Channel when I was like 10 years old. That's where these movies belong. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of horror movies from, this era that don't get enough love anymore. Back when you had video rental stores, movies like this would gain a cult following because you would have to take that chance and rent something if you're in the mood for like a horror movie. You don't really have that now. You're just kind of endless scrolling on Netflix, and even there was a little bit in the early 2010s of Netflix where you can have bad horror movies. I always think of this movie I watched called ATM. I think Josh Peck is in it, where they're literally trapped in an ATM and somebody's trying to kill them. I'm going to review that movie someday. And now, once in a while, you have something like the Terrifier movies that get a lot of buzz, but overall, you just don't have stuff like this anymore. And I think See No Evil is one of those things that could be lost to time. I hope not. I wouldn't particularly want these movies to go away. I think we always have room for a bad horror movie. This is a genre that you can have so much fun with. It's not, it's not always about your A24 elevated horror, which even that is kind of becoming a parody itself if you've seen some recent trailers, like a Paul Rudd unicorn movie I saw. So, it's for its time, especially the 2006 one, but now the 2014 one is starting to get dated. You could kind of see where that era of horror was. Would I recommend these movies? Sure, it depends on the scenario. It depends kind of on a scenario like this at the Bad Movie Brew House here on It Face the Ace. But that's going to do it for me at the Bad Movie Brew House. Let me know what you guys think of See No Evil 1 and 2 if you've ever seen it. If you're watching it for the first time because of this video, let me know. We're going to have a more in-depth conversation about it on the Ace to Face podcast with special guest, horror filmmaker Nicholas Alexander. So I will see you all then, and I will see you all in the next video.